Hey Kriegers, Robo here, and welcome back to our second set of side order custom amiibos. Welcome back to our Grand Run special video. Welcome back to our Splatoon 3 anniversary video. Welcome to our Grandfest video. Oh, finally, that one worked out. We're so sorry, Kriegers. It was a period with so much stuff on our plate. Like the start of school, we had problems with a lot of our computer programs, and even a copyright claim on the Megalodonja video. And on top of all of that, my subscription to my Adobe programs ended prematurely. So when I wanted to do that side order video, I got this. Yeah, safe to say, we're doing DaVinci Resolve now. But anyway, welcome to our video to celebrate the Grandfest. So for this, we made the Splatfest Floats into a diorama to store all of the previously released Splatoon 3 amiibos. So this excludes the side order ones and the alternate ones. So without further ado, let's get started. For this project, we tried to make everything from scratch. This way, as many other people could also try their hand at making one of these Splatfest floats if they wanted to. But sadly, we did not have enough time to actually carve a dragon's head from a block of wood. So for ours, we had to use our resin 3D printer to make the head and the flailing tails on the back. But if enough of you are interested, I'll make sure that I get all of the views, like the front, the top and the side views, as a printable version, so you can use this to carve out your own dragon's head. But for us, all that was left to do is to add these 40mm DIY Christmas ornaments as the eyes, by squeezing it in between the eyebrows, and then adding a large blob of hot glue in the back, so we get this fixed in place. Luckily, the rest of the float is all made with readily available materials, like these 9mm squared wooden dowels. These just needed to be cut to a length of 16 centimeters and then sanded to a specific angle with this little 3D printed tool. Next up was the biggest pain of this whole project, making all of the scales for the float. And this is one of the parts of the project where I would advise to have something to automate the process, because even with a laser cutter to cut the 2 thicknesses of plywood to shape, I still had to glue all 80 of these pieces together with wood glue, and now I still have to add these wooden dowels in between the little protrusions. Like these 10mm ones for the top scales, and around 70 of these smaller 6mm pieces. But after that, I finally had enough pieces prepped to be able to start on the first of the assembly. Sadly, I did not record it, but using this model that I got online, I was able to simplify the base of the floats to this middle piece. These I then put through paper cura to create a file that I could then cut from some foam board. To these I could then add a few supports to be able to add the first of these foam board boat pieces, also made with a 3D model and paper cura. Then I had to cut a small hole for the lower jaw of the dragon's head, after which I could insert a piece and hot glue it to the foam board base and to the front of the boat. Then I could grab this previous version that I made, where I wanted to 3D print the whole boat as one, but not only did that not work out, printer-wise, it also costs so much resin. So we decided to make it piece by piece, so not only can a lot more people make a Splatfest float on their own, but it also didn't cost me 60 euros to make everything from resin. But at least the first versions were very good to make sure that I get the top of the dragon's head in the right place. So using this little 20mm spacer for in between the base and the snout, while using some of these 9mm dowels as spacers to be able to use some of these big scales to add more support around both sides of the dragon's head and to mount it in place. I finished the front by adding the first of the top scales and the matching plank that makes for the top of the dragon's head. After I got the big pieces for the front, it was time to head to the back. As with the front, I started by adding the boat to the base by gluing it to its spacer. But this one spacer alone will not do for the support of the back. And so, this is where the tail comes in. Again, using the fully 3D printed prototype, I was able to get some of the measurements to where all of the pieces needed to connect and how big the spacer needed to be. So first I superglued the curl to the bottom of the tail. After which I also glue the top scale to the top curl. Also making use of some baking soda to both accelerate the superglue and also to add a little bit more body to this otherwise very weak attachment. Then when both were attached, I mark out where the top scale attaches to the base and where the lower curl touches the back of the boat. Then I get to hot glue the scale and super glue the curl in place. This will then finish up the first phase of the assembly of the Splatfest float. For the next piece, I have this 13 by 39 cm wide board with 3 holes for the deep cut amiibo. But surrounding these, I first needed to add some bamboo skewers in between these 8mm tall pieces of the 9mm square dowels. These I've spaced 3mm from the sides and the bamboo skewers will then get glued in between these in the middle. Then on the other side I also have some 15mm tall pieces of the 9mm dowel sticking out at the same place as their counterparts on top. In addition to these, I also glue these 7 cm tall dowels with these 15 mm tall skewers as spacers in between the 3 of them. Then I finally get to use some of those specially sanded 118 mm tall dowels, as I place these on this piece of 18 by 41 cm wide piece of foam board. This will form the base for the wooden supports underneath the Splatfest floats, although these supports first need to become a little bit stronger themselves. So for this I add a 42 cm long dowel 4 cm high to the posts, while also making sure that the supports themselves also match with the measurements on both the bottom and the top. Then these get an 18 cm long brace, 55 mm off the ground. Then the other one goes 45 mm on top of the first ones. And then for the final structure of the supports, I added these popsicle sticks in between the posts in this X configuration, matching up the bottom of the popsicle sticks to the top of the supports, and then leaving 25 mm on the top. Next I glue some 2mm thick craft foam strips of 5mm wide around each post. And with a lot of the construction done, I finally get to do a little bit of painting. Since the wood color of the Splatfest float is a very specific reddish purplish-like color, I had to airbrush on a few layers of the Army Painter's Crusted Soar miniature paint, since this is a very close color to what I'm looking for. Since this miniature paint is very translucent, I was required to do it in a few layers, although thanks to the airbrush, by the time I was done with the first coat over each of these big pieces, the first parts were already dry enough to start on the second coat. Despite how well I make it seem to go, this was not without its hiccups. Like a clogged airbrush, the moisture filter just not keeping up, the paint not mixing well, me touching parts so the fresh paint comes off. And on top of all of that, this wasn't even that cheap of a solution. Like, I spent just about the entire bottle of the Crusted Soar on just these 3 big pieces. And on top of all of that, the needle of my airbrush broke. Although, with that last one, in the end, it was more like a happy little accident. As confused as I am? Just listen. Okay, guys, I just had to tell you guys about something. Okay, let's start at the beginning. I was working on the Splatfest Floats Diorama, but I was working on the airbrush parts of the wood, and as you can see, it's just very splotchy because I was working with my old airbrush that I got with my compressor that I have there. Safe to say, it's just a very cheap model, and I mean, it works, especially for like bigger surfaces, but I did not like it that much. It's very inconsistent. So I actually bought, like, almost 1.5 years ago, I bought an Iwata, which worked perfectly, but during a a good cleanup session, like the tiniest little bit broke. Like here. This is a end nozzle of the airbrush. Like, it's this small. Come on. It's like this small. I can barely focus on it. This thing, I actually accidentally tightened too much, so it broke at the threads. Which was very, very disappointing because it's an Iwata. It's a really good airbrush. And even though it's a beginner model, airbrushes are not cheap. So yeah, I was forced to go back to this guy. But tonight it just wouldn't work. Like, the paint job was just very splotchy. Sometimes it didn't spray at all. Other times it would just spray like a buttload. It was just very, very inconsistent. And then came the straw that broke the camel's back. The needle on the airbrush broke. Like, it was already one that's like that was very bent. But then it also broke, so no. That was the end of it. So I thought, let's just take it apart, clean it up. Maybe some places clogged, and maybe I can fix it to get a better consistency. Then I saw that the little nozzle in my cheap airbrush is the same as that little one that I broke for the Iwata, like almost half a year ago. So I was like, hey, could I use the one from this one to fix up the Iwata? I looked and then I remembered, oh yeah, I did not just strip the thread, I actually broke it at the threads. So it was still stuck in there. So I was like, heh, the Iwata is broken, this one's broken, let's just see. So I measured what the thread size was, so it was like 1.8, I think. So I just grabbed a 1.5mm drill bit, drilled it out, and it actually came loose. Like, the thing that was clogging this up so I can not thread in the old one, it came out. So like, no actual fucking way does this work now. I put it in, tightened it very carefully, and it actually works now. Like, my Iwata is fixed because I was able to get the parts from this one. Now I can actually get some good cuts on the airbrush. What the fuck? It works! So now I'm just gonna have to throw this away. I don't have a use for this anymore. And yeah, now I also don't need to get a replacement needle because the water one was still a good needle. It only had that little nozzle here that's supposed to go like this. That was broken off, but yeah, I fixed it. So I don't need this one anymore. Hehehe. Oh, that was so fucking lucky. That could have gone massively wrong, but it didn't, and I'm very happy about that. Finally, a little bit of luck with this project. But seeing as how much I still needed to paint and how much miniature paints it would cost me to paint everything, I had to remind myself that there are more paint than just the army painter miniature paints. So for both the supports and a lot of the other wooden pieces on the floats, I was able to color match a mix of yellow, brown and peach acrylic paints to make the same shade as this desert yellow that I used for the first base coats of the pieces. I can then start to add some wood grain back to these. By using some different shades of brown, I add back the wood grain to the boat, the dragon's head, the tail and the supports, and this way I was able to make for a very convincing wood texture on most of the pieces. Then, to finish the supports, I needed to add these bundles of light natural twine to a lot of the crossings. For these big axes, I first glued some of the twine to the left side of the crossing. Then I started to wrap the twine about 4 times before I skipped 2 wrappings worth of space to make the other 5 on the other side. Then I go around these and fill the whole space in between the popsicle sticks. Then I glue these to the inside of the supports and finish this off with 4 more wrappings in the middle to make up for the ones we skipped in the beginning. Then for these quarter pieces, I'd glued the twine to the inside already, and then leaving a hole just about as big as a pencil before I start to glue down 4 wrappings. Then from the back, I come through the hole of the wrappings and pull this down again. Then this time, I go through the back and repeat this 1 more time. Then I glue it to the back to finish this knot. And with the little that I have left over, I can then also go and make 2 more wrappings around the top of each pole. Final knot I need to cover is the crossing between the poles and the long horizontal supports. These start from the back, where you need to wrap the twine across from the top left to the lower right. Then you take this and you go from the top right to the lower left. But before you pull this taut, you need to take the end of the twine and pull it through the loop between the top and the bottom right corners. This you then pull tight with all of your might, and this way you get an X on both sides. Then it's just a few more wrappings between this, and we finish this off by gluing the end to the back of the pole. And now comes the fun part! Because of all of the handling of the twine, lots of the fibers have come loose from their wrappings. So, using a lighter, we get to burn all of these away. And of course, you need to do this in the dark.
Sure.
Oh, fire. And remember all of those 80 plus skills? Well, now not only do we need to add a coat of primer onto all of these by hand, but we now also need to paint our colors onto them as well. Starting with our wood mix on the lower edge. And when I say there were a lot of these, I was not kidding in the slightest. So we better get back to adding the light turquoise layer onto the outer edge. With its 2 layers. Ugh, stupidly opaque acrylic paints. Luckily, I can take a short break from these by adding this reddish brown shade on the eyebrows of the dragon's head. Not only does it also get applied to the outer edge of the lips, but it also gets applied to the front of the front boat and the decorations on the back boat. Sadly, after that, it was right back to the scales. Luckily for us, we've made enough progress with all of the semi-wood and turquoise that we can now do a little bit more fun stuff by adding the individual colors for each team on the scales. There were a lot of team colors that we could have chosen for our Splatfest float, but I think most of you will agree with us that we've chosen the simple Shiver versus Fry versus Big Man Splatfest colors. That way, we can both represent an official Splatfest, and we can keep the colors matching to the amiibo. So, once all of the scales had their coat of blue, yellow and red paint, I next had to go and spend the night adding the outline of the gold details back on top of all of the colors. And after that was a lot, and I mean a lot of black priming. Both on the scales, and even on the fins. Then we took a little bit more time with that mix of light turquoise to add the markings around the dragon's head and on the outer edges of the tail. Then I have a few more purple details to add around the head, like the inside of the eye socket, or the lips and the inside of the mouth. Now we can, at last, give a little bit more focus on the fins. Now that we need to paint some of the gun metals on the tips, where we had already primed these with black. All 24 of them. Something we also didn't get to point out were the popsicle sticks and the stirring sticks that I had already superglued to the edges of both podiums to hide their ugly wooden edges on this diorama. I mention these as we now work to add some orc blood mixed with a little bit of white to all of the edges, on both the small podium on the edges of the boats. And with all of the boats, I do mean all of the boats. And even the edges of the main stage. Then I add a little bit of blue to the iris on the dragon's head. But for this I first make a ring around the pupil, after which I use this small brush to flare some blue streaks inwards. This makes for a more realistic eye feel, or at least as realistic as you're gonna get on a parade float. Then we finish the head off with some white on its teeth. And then a little bit of dry brushing to give them more of a weathered wooden edge. With the head complete, it's finally time for my favorite miniature paint, gold.
I love gold!
This gets applied to all of the corners on the main stage and some of the in-between pieces on top of the stage. You'll see what I mean when these show up again. And finally, we also get to complete all these stupid scales with the gold details on top. And to also complete the main stage, all there was left to do was to hot glue the amiibo holders in their respective holes. Then we have one more thing I almost forgot to make, the flags that go on both sides of the little podium. For these I'd covered some black fabric with Mod Podge to first of all make it sturdier, second of all it also prevents fraying over time, and third of all it gives me the ability to use these gold and silver acrylic markers to add the 3 client logos for Shiver, Fry and Big Man to the flags. So that we end up with these. Both of these then get glued to these flag posts that I made from some round bamboo skewers with little toothpick bracers that I'd coated with the same reddish brown that I'd also used for like the eyebrows. These then get a dab of super glue so that we can attach the flag to each of the 2 posts. Now that we finally have all of the painting done, it was time to add the middle boat to the Splatfest float. I had to keep these separated for ease of painting, but now I finally get to add the hot glue to the 3 braces that go for each of the boat pieces, and press this in the 3 slots that I'd cut into the base. Starting with the 3 top scales of big men that I still needed to add, since the ones for Shiver and Fry were already part of the construction of the head and the tail respectively. Then I got to add all of the other colors, where some were very easy to add, especially on the right side of the float. But on the lower line, I had 3 scales that I had to cut in half to be able to place them in between the braces of the boats. But the rest was sadly also not as easy as I thought, because for a lot of these, I had to account for the 3 beams that will hold up the smaller podium in the front, since in-game it just clips through all of the scales without any worry. But this is sadly not possible in the real world. So I had to do my best to make sure that I either left enough space, or that I added some holes in a lot of the scales so that I could add the smaller podium afterwards. Same was true for the main stage. There also just clipped through all of the scales as those supports underneath it came down. So for mine, I had to do some very specific and focused work as to not destroy the main stage. And that's also why I did not record that part. It was very focused work, and to be honest, when I finished it, I was not happy with it. But if you're also planning on trying your hand at making the Splatfest float, if you leave a comment down below, I'll make a short explanation in the next video of how I made it so that the main stage matched up with all of the scales. But with the main stage finally superglued on top of the float, I did realize that I did not like how cold the gold spray paint was that I'd used on the amiibo holders, in comparison to the gold of the miniature paints. So I even went out of my way to airbrush some new gold on the amiibo holders, so these also matched up with all of the gold details around the float. And come on, it looks so much warmer. And so I finally get to finish this project by adding the float on top of the supports. Here I just needed to make a few adjustments to the supports, like a cut in the back for the tail, and some holes in the X supports for the beams of the boats. But with this little extra jigsawing, I was able to get the float sitting nicely on top of the supports. And I even got to add the little podium on the front too. Now all that was left was to superglue the fins to the underside of the boat, since it does not need to layer there anymore. And then, as the final thing, I just needed to glue the flags on both sides of the little podium. And with that, we can officially announce that our Splatoon 3 Splatfest Floats Diorama is finished. Hey Kriegers, Robert here, and we hope you enjoyed this first look at our Splatfest Float Diorama. And for all the ones of you that were thinking about maybe also trying to hand at this project, but were scarce because of the amount of scales and fins that you needed to prepare, don't worry. In our case, we were actually preparing to make a second one for a commission. That way I just had to get all of the samey stuff out of the way now, so when I make it during other future projects, I don't have to do all of this stuff then. So if you also want to make one, you just need about 40 or so of these scales and 12 fins. Then just imagine what I had to go through when I had to make twice that. I think I spent about a week making all of these things. Oh, that was not a fun week. But anyway, I think that's going to be all from us for now. So, I hope you all are having a great rest of the Grandfest. And so, keep those creative gears turning, and we will see you guys in our next video. Wait. You know what? I don't think we're done with this thing yet. Oh yeah, that's looking much better already.